Chapter 1. The Dark Mystery of a Lost Life. In a city lost between old and new, where glass skyscrapers shone next to ancient stone buildings, lived a man named Adrian. He was a renowned lawyer, known for his oratorical skills and for winning cases with almost supernatural ease. But behind his charming smile, Adrian hid a dark secret. He sold his integrity for gold and power. He lied, manipulated and betrayed without blinking. The money flowed, the fame grew, but his soul struggled in a silent battle between justice and corruption. On a rainy evening, after winning a trial through a well-crafted lie, Adrian hurried home. The rain hit his face, but it didn't bother him. He was used to ignoring the discomfort, just as he ignored the pangs of conscience. When he reached the corner of a dark street, a mysterious figure blocked his path. "Your time has come, Adrian," the stranger told him, his deep voice resonating like thunder in the night. Adrian stopped suddenly, feeling a cold shiver down his spine. The figure was wrapped in a black cloak, its face hidden in shadow. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" Adrian asked, trying to seem fearless. "You don't know me, but I know you too well. I know every lie you've told, every oath you've broken. You've made sin an art." Before Adrian could answer, an invisible force pulled him into darkness. The world around him dissolved, and he woke up in an unknown place, a realm between life and death. Two huge gates rose in front of him. One shone with a divine light, warm and soothing, while the other was immersed in a chilling darkness, from which a sinister murmur could be heard. From the light of the divine gate stepped an angel with silver wings, his face emanating an angelic gentleness. "I am Seraphiel, the guardian of hope. Your life has been full of sins, but you have also had moments of kindness. You still have a chance to choose." From the shadow of the dark gate, a demon with fiery eyes and an evil smile appeared. "I am Azrath, the one who witnessed all your deeds. You lied, you deceived, you destroyed. Your place is in the darkness." Adrian felt an immense pressure on his soul. The angel and the demon began to show him memories. The moments when he betrayed his friends, when he manipulated his innocent clients, but also the moments when he was merciful, when he helped without asking for anything in return. "There is no predetermined path," Seraphiel said. "Even now you can decide. But you will not escape suffering," Azrath murmured. "Sin is not easily erased. How can I choose when I'm so lost?" Adrian asked, his voice trembling with despair. "Look within yourself," the angel replied. "It's not about being sinless, it's about wanting to change." "But darkness gives you power," the demon laughed. "A power without remorse, without conscience." Adrian fell to his knees, feeling his soul torn. He remembered the day he betrayed his best friend for a higher position, felt the shame and guilt that had followed him ever since. But he also remembered the day he defended a poor old man without asking for any money, just to do justice. "I want to choose the light," Adrian whispered, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I want to change, even if it will be hard." Seraphiel held out his hand. "Choose the light." But light does not mean the absence of pain, but the acceptance of guilt and the desire to make amends. The demon spread his dark wings, a cloud of black smoke enveloping him. "You won't get away that easily, Adrian. I will follow you until you fall again." Adrian reached out to the angel, feeling a soothing warmth. The divine light began to envelop him, and the realm between the gates disappeared. When he opened his eyes, he was in his bed, with the rain beating against the window. His heart was beating wildly, but he felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The next day, Adrian gave up the dirty cases and asked forgiveness from those he had hurt. He began to work for the needy, to repair his past mistakes. But every night, he felt the presence of two unseen eyes, one of fire, the other of light, watching him, waiting to see if he would stay on the right path or if he would fall back into darkness. Because the choice was not just one night, but about every day that was to come. The days passed, and Adrian felt the burden of his decision with every moment. Every gesture, every word now seemed imbued with a huge responsibility. He had given up dirty cases, refused bribes, and began to defend people who could not afford to pay. Every honest victory brought him relief, but at night, when silence fell over the city, he felt the presence of two unseen eyes, some burning like embers, others shining like stars. Late one evening, working on a difficult case for a family he was defending pro bono, Adrian felt a cold breath on the back of his neck. He turned suddenly, but the room was empty. Then, a shadow began to form in the dark corner of the room. Out of the darkness, the familiar figure of the demon Azrath appeared, his black wings spread and his eyes sparkling with malice. "Did you think you had escaped me, Adrian?" Azrath asked, his deep voice vibrating in the cold air. "Your choice was not an end, but only the beginning." Adrian tried to remain calm, although his heart was beating wildly. "I'm not the same man anymore. I chose the light." The demon laughed mockingly. "The light? You are lying to yourself. You are still the same traitor, only now you wear a mask of righteousness. You cannot erase what you have done." "I know that," Adrian replied, his voice trembling. "But I can try to make things right." "Make things right." Azrath approached, his dark shadow stretching across Adrian's desk. "And what will you do with the temptations that will come? Do you think you can resist when you are tested again?" Adrian clenched his fists, remembering all the times he had given in before. But now it was different. Or at least he wanted to be. "I will resist that I chose the light." "Then let's see how strong your choice is," whispered Azrath, disappearing in a cloud of black smoke that dissipated into the silence of the night. The next day, Adrian was visited by a former client, Victor, an influential man who had offered him considerable sums to win lawsuits by any means necessary. Victor handed him a thick envelope, filled with high-value banknotes. "I need you again, Adrian. I need to get out of a complicated lawsuit. You know what you have to do." Adrian looked at the heavy envelope in front of him. He could have paid all his debts, secured a future without financial worries. But in his mind the voice of the angel Seraphiel echoed. Light does not mean the absence of pain, but the acceptance of guilt and the desire to make amends. He felt Azrath's burning gaze somewhere in the shadows, waiting to see if he would fall again. With a decisive movement, Adrian pushed the envelope back. "I won't do this again, Victor. Find another lawyer." Victor looked at him in surprise, then contemptuously. "You have changed, Adrian. But this change will cost you. You will be nothing in this city anymore." "Better nothing with a clear conscience than everything with a dirty soul," Adrian replied, his voice firm. Victor left angrily, letting the door slam behind him. Adrian felt a deep relief, but also an unease that followed him all day. He knew that his decision would not remain without consequences. That night, as he tried to fall asleep, Adrian felt a familiar presence in the room. Silver light filled the room, and the angel Seraphiel appeared, his wings shining in the darkness. "You chose well, Adrian," the angel said, smiling gently. "But the road is long, and the darkness does not give up easily." "I know," Adrian murmured. "But I will not give in again. You have won a battle, but the war continues. Azrath will not give up on conquering your soul. Be vigilant." The light began to fade, and the angel's figure dissolved into thin air. But before he completely disappeared, Seraphiel left behind a glimmer of light that floated gently until it reached Adrian's palm. "He was a small amulet, with an ancient symbol engraved on it, a circle surrounded by wings. This will protect you from the darkness," the angel's voice whispered, echoing. Adrian held the amulet in his hand, feeling its soothing warmth. He knew the battles would not end soon, but now he had a weapon against the temptations that lurked around him. That night, for the first time in a long time, Adrian slept peacefully. But somewhere in the depths of the darkness, Azrath was sharpening his fangs, preparing for the next confrontation. The choice had been made, but the balance of souls continued to swing between light and darkness. Mornings had become easier for Adrian. Each sunrise brought with it a new hope, a chance to repair his past. With Seraphiel's amulet around his neck, he felt he could face any temptation. But deep down, he knew that Azrath would not give up so easily. Several weeks had passed since his confrontation with the demon, and Adrian was rebuilding his reputation as a lawyer, fair and honest. The dirty clients were gone, but so were the huge sums of money. His office seemed emptier than ever, but for the first time in his life, Adrian felt truly free. One rainy morning, a modestly dressed woman entered his office. She looked tired, overwhelmed by life. Her eyes were red from crying. "Mr. Adrian, please help me. My son has been wrongly accused. I have no money, but please. It's all I have." Adrian saw sincere pain in her eyes. He knew the trial would be difficult, that he would have to face a lawyer renowned for his dirty methods, the same man he had admired and imitated in the past. But he accepted the case without hesitation, feeling a new determination. Days turned into sleepless nights. And Adrian worked hard to find evidence that would prove the young man's innocence. T was the first time he felt what it was like to fight for justice, not for money or power. When the day of the trial arrived, the courtroom was full. People had come to see the confrontation between two titans of the law. His opponent, Victor Daube, was a tall, elegant man with a cold smile and a convincing voice. Adrian knew all too well how cunning he could be. During the trial, Victor began to manipulate witnesses, distort the facts. Just as Adrian had done in the past. At one point, Adrian felt a growing anger, a longing for the old methods that could have helped him win easily. And then he felt that familiar cold again in the corner of the courtroom. Azareth stood leaning against the wall, smiling slyly. No one else could see him, but Adrian felt the demon's burning gaze. Do you see how he wins? Are you sure you don't want to use the weapons you've perfected for so many years? Azareth whispered, his voice creeping into Adrian's mind. Just a little lie, a little manipulation, and victory is yours. Adrian felt the temptation snaking through his mind. An inner struggle tore at him, and for a moment, he almost gave in. But he felt Seraphiel's amulet glow warmly against his chest. Soothing warmth flooded his soul, reminding him of the choice he had made. He stood up and presented the case with integrity. Using only the truth and pure evidence, he attacked Victor's logic with intelligence and reasoning, without a trace of cunning. When he finished, the courtroom was plunged into silence. The judge deliberated for a long time, but finally declared the young man innocent. His mother burst into tears of joy, and Adrian felt a satisfaction he had never felt before. He had won honestly. As the people left the courtroom, Azarath appeared beside him, glaring at him with smoldering hatred. You have won this battle, but you cannot defeat me in the long run. Temptations will come again and again, and I will be there to push you into the abyss. Then I will fight again, Adrian replied, looking at the demon without fear. I am no longer the man I was. Azarath laughed mockingly, and his shadow dissipated into the air. But Adrian knew that he had not truly disappeared. He was hiding, waiting to strike again. After the trial, as he left the courtroom, a soft light shone beside him. Seraphiel stood there, his silver wings fluttering gently in the wind. You are stronger than you think, Adrian. You have resisted temptation even in the face of darkness. But your path does not end here. Azarath will try to destroy you further. Adrian clutched the amulet to his chest, feeling its blessed warmth. As long as I have the light on my side, I will not fall. The angel smiled and rose gently from the ground, floating in the light. Remember, Adrian, light is not the absence of darkness, but the power to face it. Then he rose to the sky, leaving behind a glow that illuminated Adrian's soul. He knew that the fight would not end soon, but he was ready. With determined steps, he set off towards his office, ready to face the future. Because the real fight was not just with Azarath, but with the shadow within himself. And each day was a new chance to choose the light. Azarath licked his wounds in the darkness, angry that he had lost to Adrian again. His old protege was becoming stronger and stronger, harder to corrupt. But the demon knew that no one was untouchable. Every soul has a weakness, a vulnerable point that the darkness can exploit. Standing in the shadow of a dark portal, Azarath focused his energy, summoning a graceful figure. A woman with hair as black as night and eyes as green as hypnotizing appeared before him. She had full lips and a seductive smile. She wore an elegant suit that emphasized her perfect figure. It's time to attack differently, Azarath murmured, his ember eyes shining evilly. You will be his temptation. The woman smiled, a flame playing in her gaze. As you wish, Master. No one can resist my charms. Your name will be Isabella. You will play the role of an ambitious, yet vulnerable and charming lawyer. Win his trust, and then his soul. With a silky laugh, Isabella disappeared in a swirl of black smoke, materializing in the mortal world, right at the door of Adrian's office. It was a clear day, and Adrian was working on a new case. The battle in court had galvanized him, and now he wanted to fight for the wronged, to make up for the mistakes of the past. A light knock brought him out of his thoughts. Come in, he said, without looking up from his files. The door opened slowly, and a sweet scent invaded the room. When he looked up, Adrian was speechless. In front of him stood a young woman of astonishing beauty. Her black hair fell in silky waves on her shoulders, and her green eyes sparkled playfully. Hello, she said in a velvety voice. I apologize for coming unannounced, But I heard you're hiring young lawyers and I desperately need a chance. Adrian stood up abruptly, almost knocking over his chair. He tried to look professional, but he couldn't take his eyes off her. She had a natural elegance, a charming smile that warmed his entire being. Of course. Please, take a seat, he said, indicating the chair in front of the desk. What's your name? Isabella. Isabella Marin. Her green eyes deepened into his gaze, and Adrian felt a strange warmth in his chest. Beautiful name, he murmured, realizing immediately that he had spoken without thinking. She blushed and cleared her throat. I'm sorry. So, you're a rookie lawyer? Isabella smiled shyly. Yes, I recently graduated and have been trying to find a job, but without success. I've heard about your integrity, about how you fight for justice, and I wanted to learn from someone like you. Adrian felt a surge of pride. His image had changed, and now someone admired him for his integrity. But Isabella wasn't just an ambitious young lawyer, she was charming. Her voice had a musicality that made him want to listen to her for hours. You're hired, he said without thinking. You have a vacant office right next to mine. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask me. Isabella smiled broadly, and her green eyes sparkled with satisfaction. Thank you very much. I promise I will work hard. And the following days, Isabella quickly proved her worth. She was intelligent, agile, and had a remarkable ability to analyze cases. Adrian was impressed by the speed with which she learned, but especially by the way she anticipated his thoughts. He felt understood, appreciated, and attracted to her. Every time Isabella leaned over his desk to show him something in the files, her sweet scent enveloped his senses. He noticed her every gesture, every graceful movement. She was kind, smiling, and managed to make him feel alive. When they worked late, Isabella would bring him hot coffee and tell him about her dreams, about how she wanted to become a lawyer for justice. Inspired by him, Adrian felt flattered, but also emotionally connected to her. Over time, Isabella began to ask him for advice, not only professional, but also personal. She asked him about his life, about his fears and his hopes. She listened to him with perfect attention, and Adrian felt that he had found someone who truly understood him. One evening, after a long day of work, Isabella touched his hand lightly. You know, Mr. Adrian, I have never met a man like you. You are a hero to me. Her gaze was so sincere, so warm, that Adrian felt his heart beating wildly. He leaned slightly towards her, and Isabella did not withdraw. Her smile was mysterious, her green eyes hypnotizing. She did not know that, at that moment, Azrath was watching them from the shadows, with an evil smile on his face. Isabella played her role perfectly. She had penetrated Adrian's soul and was beginning to take control of him. The demon knew that. The decisive battle was near, and this time, he was determined not to lose. Days turned into weeks, and Isabella's presence in Adrian's life became stronger and stronger. They were inseparable at the office, and their discussions often lasted late into the night. In Adrian's eyes, Isabella was not only a brilliant lawyer, but also a woman charming, sensitive, and mysterious. One evening, after a tiring day in court, Adrian and Isabella were left alone in the office. The rain was softly beating on the windows, and the diffused light in the room created an intimate atmosphere. Isabella sat on the edge of her desk, watching the rain with a melancholy air. Sometimes I wonder if the fight for justice has any meaning, she murmured, her velvety voice enveloping Adrian. Why do you say that? He asked, surprised by the sadness in her tone. I have seen so much injustice. Corrupt people who escape unpunished, victims who never receive justice. She sighed deeply, letting her black hair fall over her shoulders. Sometimes I feel helpless. Adrian felt an impulse to comfort her, to ease her pain. He stood up and approached her, placing a hand on her shoulder. I felt that too, but that's exactly why we must keep fighting. Every victory counts. Every act of justice changes the world, even if only a little. Isabella turned to him, her green eyes shining like two emeralds in the pale light. You are an idealist, Adrian. And maybe that's why I admire you so much. For a moment, the silence was so deep that only Adrian's heartbeat could be heard. Isabella's breathing was close to his, and her sweet perfume intoxicated him. He found himself leaning towards her, and their lips met in a long, passionate kiss. Isabella cupped his face with her delicate hands, and Adrian felt that everyone around him disappeared. It was just the two of them, enveloped in an intense, irresistible emotion. but in the shadow of the office, Azrith smiled contentedly. The moment was approaching when Adrian's soul would be chained again. The next day, Adrian woke up with a strange feeling of guilt. He had tried to keep his emotions under control, to remain professional, but he had failed. He had fallen in love with Isabella, and the thought terrified him. He felt vulnerable, exposed. At the office, Isabella seemed the same charming woman, but now she looked at him with a special warmth. Her smile was seductive, her delicate gestures fascinated him. She called him to spend more and more time with her, and Adrian could not resist. Soon, Isabella began to take on more and more responsibilities. She organized his agenda, filtered his clients, and even offered him advice in complicated cases. She was efficient, intuitive, and seemed to anticipate his every need. But it was not only that. Isabella had a strange power over him. She controlled his mood, dictated his emotions. When she was close to him, Adrian felt a euphoric happiness. But when she moved away, he was overwhelmed by a tormenting anxiety. "I need to concentrate," he often repeated to himself. But his thoughts always ran to Isabella. He could no longer sleep. He could no longer eat without thinking about her. One evening, while he was working late in the office, he felt a coldness in the room. Shadow fell on the walls, and Azrith appeared in front of him, smiling mockingly. "What have you done to me?" Adrian shouted, facing him with anger. Azrith laughed softly, looking at him with contempt. "Me? I did nothing, my dear. You are the one who opened her heart. I only created the temptation. And she completely engulfed you." "Isabella," Adrian murmured, realizing the truth with horror. "She is part of your plan." "Oh, not just a part. She is my most powerful weapon. She weakens your will, grinds your soul. And very soon, you will be mine again." Adrian felt an intense pain in his chest. He remembered Seraphiel's amulet. He held it in his palm and felt the blessed warmth. But it was not enough. Isabella's influence was too strong, and his emotions too chaotic. "Leave her alone," he shouted, desperately. "I will not fall into your trap." Azrith smiled treacherously. "Oh, but you have already fallen. You see, Adrian, your light has always been shadowed by hidden desires. And Isabella is nothing more than the reflection of your deepest desires. You fell in love with your own weakness." Then she disappeared, leaving Adrian overwhelmed with despair. He knew he had to fight, but how could he give up on Isabella, the woman who had captured his heart? That night, for the first time in a long time, Adrian felt the darkness gaining ground again. And somewhere in the shadows, Azrith laughed, knowing that his most treacherous weapon had just taken effect. Adrian could no longer find peace. The day was dominated by Isabella's presence, and the night was haunted by strange dreams in which Azrith laughed mockingly, and Isabella always appeared like a shadow that drew him into the darkness. Seraphiel's amulet only offered him temporary relief, because his feelings for Isabella were too strong. One morning, Adrian decided to confront her. He had to find out the truth. To understand who she really was, he mustered up the courage and invited Isabella to dinner, under the pretext of celebrating the victory of an important case. They chose an elegant restaurant, with diffused lights and discreet music. Isabella wore a black velvet dress that she emphasized her graceful figure, and her hair fell in silky curls over her shoulders. When she smiled, Adrian felt that warmth invade his heart again. "Thank you for the invitation," she said in a velvety voice. "I feel honored to celebrate with you." Adrian tried to remain calm. "Isabella, I want to ask you something. Who are you really?" Her green eyes flickered for a split second, but she kept her charming smile. "I'm just an ambitious lawyer who was lucky enough to meet you." "You're not just that." I felt from the beginning that there was something strange. It's like you know me better than I know myself. You know exactly what to say, how to make me feel. It's like, he hesitated, looking at her flawless face. "It's like you have power over me." Isabella laughed, a crystalline laugh that made him feel foolish. "Adrian, do you really think I have magical powers? Maybe you just fell in love." Her words hit him like a bolt of lightning. Yes, it was true, he was head over heels in love with her. But that was precisely the problem. His emotions were too intense, too sudden. It wasn't natural. "And what if this isn't true love?" he asked, his voice trembling. "What if it's just an illusion?" For a moment, Isabella's mask fell. Her gaze darkened, and the smile faded from her lips. but she quickly recovered, changing her tone to one full of affection. Adrian, why do you doubt what you feel? There is nothing more real than your emotions. Adrian wanted to believe her, but his instincts told him otherwise. He felt Seraphiel's amulet warm against his chest, a sign that the angel's light was trying to protect him. Isabella, I can't go on like this. If there is any truth in you, you must tell me now. Who are you really? Isabella let silence fall between them. For the first time, vulnerability crossed her perfect face. She looked down, avoiding his piercing gaze. It wasn't supposed to be this way. I shouldn't have gotten so close to you, she whispered, her voice trembling. Adrian froze. So it's true, you were sent to destroy me. Her green eyes filled with tears, but even so, they remained just as mesmerizing. I had no choice. I was created from your desires, from your weaknesses. Azrith shaped me and ordered me to conquer your heart, to then break it into pieces. Adrian stepped back, feeling his world collapse. Everything. Was it a lie? Not everything, she said, a tear sliding down her cheek. I was sent to ruin your soul, but I didn't foresee that I would fall in love with you. Adrian was speechless. Emotions were racing chaotically in his soul, anger, betrayal, but also love. Love for the woman who had been created to destroy him. Isabella, he murmured, reaching out to her. But Isabella pulled back, her green eyes shining with pain. We can't be together. There is no happy ending for us. I am a creation of darkness, a tool of Azrith. And as long as I exist, he will have a way to you. Adrian felt everything collapse around him. Then what can we do? You must destroy me, she said in a determined voice. It's the only way you will escape Azrith's influence. I can't do this. I can't destroy you. I love you. He cried, his eyes filling with tears. I love you too, Adrian. And that's exactly why you must do this. Isabella reached out and placed Seraphiel's amulet in his palm. Use the angel's light. Only it can dissolve the darkness from which I am created. Adrian felt the amulet radiate warmth, but his hand trembled. He couldn't lose it. He couldn't destroy it. But Isabella looked at him with that tenderness that broke his heart. Please, Adrian, release me, she whispered, her tears shining like diamonds in the pale light. Adrian raised the amulet, and its light began to grow, filling the room with a divine glow. Isabella smiled one last time, and her face was serene, at peace. Thank you, and I will always love you, she said before the light completely enveloped her, dissolving her figure into millions of sparks of light. When it was all over, Adrian was left alone in the darkness, holding the amulet that still held a trace of Isabella's warmth. He realized that a part of him had gone with her, and in the shadows, Azrith screamed in rage, his plan crumbling in the face of the love he had underestimated. But the fight was not over. And he knew that he would return, stronger than ever. Chapter 2. The Fight with the Demon. Adrian stood in the middle of the empty room, Seraphiel's amulet glowing faintly in his palm, still felt her warmth, like a trace of the presence of Isabella who had now disappeared. His soul was torn. He had loved an illusion, a creation of darkness that had become a victim of his own love. It felt empty, betrayed not only by Azrith, but also by his own feelings. The days that followed were a torment. The office, everything reminded him of her, the chair he used to sit on, the files they worked on. Together, even the faint scent of her perfume seemed to linger in the air. Adrian could no longer bear the oppressive silence of his office and began to avoid the place where he had once built his empire. One night, he dreamed of her. Isabella appeared at the edge of his bed, with the same gaze gentle and melancholy. You must fight, Adrian, she told him. Azrith will not give up. He will pursue you until you fall for good. Why did he choose me? Adrian asked, his voice echoing in his dream. Because you were weak, you lusted for power, you fell prey to greed and pride. Azrith feeds on the shadows in people, and you had enough to attract him. Adrian felt a sharp pain in his chest. He knew he was right. He had allowed himself to be corrupted by success, had sacrificed his integrity for gold and power. But you can change, Isabella continued, her face blurring. Seraphiel saw the light in you, and I felt it. Fight, Adrian. Fight for your soul. When he woke up, the amulet was glowing on his bedside table, as if it had reacted to her words. Decision invaded his heart. He could no longer run. Azrith was still looking for him, And this time he had to be prepared. He began to search for answers. He visited old churches, spoke to priests and monks who seemed to know more than they let on. He discovered that Azrath was one of the most powerful demons of temptation, a master of illusions who lured weak souls into darkness. You cannot defeat a demon with will alone, an old monk told him with a piercing gaze. You must purify your soul, come to terms with your past, and rise above the desires that weakened you. So Adrian began to make amends for his mistakes. He gave up all the dirty cases, asked for forgiveness from the clients he had betrayed, returned the money he had earned unjustly. He began to volunteer, to defend people in need without asking for anything in return. But even so, Azrath did not stop haunting him. Tonight, he heard her voice whispering to him in the darkness. You can't escape me, Adrian. You are mine. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to move, to follow him, and the air became heavy and cold whenever he felt the demon's presence. One night, the dream became a nightmare. Azrath appeared before him, his eyes burning with rage. You destroyed my creation. You dared to oppose me. I am no longer your slave, Adrian replied, his voice trembling with fear, but also with determination. I am no longer the man you thought I was. Azrath laughed mockingly, his dark wings spreading menacingly. Do you think you can escape the shadows in your soul? Do you think I will let you walk towards the light? I am no longer afraid of you, Adrian shouted, and Seraphiel's amulet began to glow again, filling the dream with a divine light. The demon roared in anger, trying to defend itself from the blinding glare. It's not over. You will never escape me. Then it dissolved into the darkness, leaving Adrian alone in the light. When he woke up, Adrian knew the fight wasn't over. Azrath was still there, lurking, waiting for a moment of weakness. But now he had something he hadn't had before, faith that he could win. Looking at the amulet, he whispered a prayer. Seraphiel, give me the strength to endure, and never fall into darkness again. The shadows in the room seemed to recede, and a ray of light filtered through the window, bathing him in warmth. Adrian felt for the first time in a long time that he wasn't alone. But he knew that Azrath would return. And this time, he would be ready to face him. It had been weeks since Adrian had begun his journey toward forgiveness. He had given up his ill-gotten fortune and devoted his time to noble causes. But deep down, he felt that the final battle with Azrath was approaching. On a dark night, when the sky was covered with heavy clouds, Adrian was returning home after a tiring day at the courthouse. The streets were deserted, and the cold air penetrated his coat. He had almost reached the door of his apartment when a cold breeze made him freeze in place. Shadows began to dance around him, outlining a familiar silhouette. Azrath appeared, his dark wings spread and his eyes burning with hatred. But he was not alone. Beside him stood Isabella. Adrian felt his heart tighten. Isabella seemed as beautiful as the first day he had seen her, but her gaze was empty, cold, lifeless. You thought you could get rid of me? Azrath's voice was sharp as a dagger. You thought you could find forgiveness? I'm not afraid of you anymore, Adrian replied, trying to control the tremor in his voice. I chose the light. Azrath smiled mockingly. The light. Then look what your light did. And with a wave of her hand, Isabella stepped forward, her blue eyes shining strangely. Adrian. Her voice was like a distant echo. Why did you abandon me? Why didn't you save me? Isabella. I tried. I loved you. Lies. Azrath thundered. You were weak. You let her perish, and now her soul belongs to me. Adrian felt his knees shake. No. It's not true. You corrupted her. You transformed her. She chose, the demon replied, a wicked smile curling his lips. She chose power, just like you. And now she's just a shadow, my prisoner. Adrian. Isabella's voice broke, and cold tears slid down her cheeks. He holds me captive. I can't escape. The pain in her eyes tore at Adrian. He couldn't leave her in Azrath's clutches. Not after everything he had suffered because of him. He clasped Seraphiel's amulet in his palm, feeling divine warmth fill his soul. I won't leave you, Isabella. I will save you, even if it means fighting the darkness itself. Azrath laughed, a grotesque sound filling the cold night air. Do you think you can save her? She's mine. And you will be next. With a sudden movement, The demon sent a wave of darkness towards Adrian, shadows trying to engulf his body and tear his soul apart. But the amulet shone brightly, emanating a divine light that repelled the dark attack. "Seraphiel, give me the strength to fight," Adrian shouted, and the light from the amulet grew in intensity, forming a protective shield around him. Azrath roared in anger. "Cursed be you! You cannot escape me!" And with a violent movement, he commanded Isabella, "Attack him." Isabella's body moved like a puppet, forced by the demon's will. Her blue eyes were empty, but tears continued to flow. "Adrian, help me. Fight. Isabella, fight against him," Adrian shouted, but her body was pushed forward, her delicate hands turning into dark claws that tried to strike him. He could not hurt her, he could not fight against the woman he loved. But he had to free her. The amulet began to vibrate in his palm, and a gentle voice echoed in his mind. "Light does not just repel darkness, it can heal." Adrian understood. He focused all his will, all the love he felt for Isabella, and the amulet began to radiate a warm, bright light. "Isabella, fight. Remember who you were before the darkness touched you. Remember us." The light touched Isabella, and her body trembled. The claws disappeared, her eyes regained their human glow. "Adrian, I was so weak. I betrayed you." "No," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Not you. Azrath corrupted you. But now you are free." "No." Azrath screamed, the darkness around him billowing like a storm. "You will not escape." Adrian turned to the demon, feeling the light fill him with a power he had never felt before. "Your power over me is over. You have lost, Azrath." With a cry of rage, the demon lunged at him, but the light from the amulet exploded, flooding the darkness with divine brilliance. The shadows melted, and Azrath screamed in agony before disappearing completely. When the light dissipated, Adrian and Isabella stood together, embracing. The sky above them had cleared of clouds, and the first rays of dawn were making their way over the horizon. Adrian knew that although the battle had been hard, the light had won in the end. But above all, it was love that had freed Isabella's soul. Adrian and Isabella stood on the roof of the building, watching the sunrise that colored the sky a mixture of orange and pale pink. The morning light seemed to chase away the last traces of darkness that remained in their souls. "What will happen now?" Isabella asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I was Azrath's creation, a puppet made of illusions and desires. Is there a way for me?" Adrian took her hands in his, feeling their real warmth. "You are more than just a creation. You chose to fight it, to resist the darkness. That means you have a soul that can be saved." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "But I don't know who I am. I don't know if I've ever had a real life." Adrian smiled sadly. "Then we'll discover together. I won't abandon you. I won't let your sacrifice be in vain." But before Isabella could answer, a cold wind began to blow, and the sky suddenly darkened. From the shadows of the morning, a guttural voice rang out, making the earth vibrate. "You haven't earned your freedom yet." The air darkened, contorting like a heavy mist that gathered into a frightening shape. Azrath had reappeared, but he no longer had human form. He was a creature of pure shadow, his eyes of embers blazing with implacable hatred. How is that possible?" Adrian asked, feeling a fear that froze his blood in his veins. "I have defeated you. You cannot destroy the darkness so easily," Azrath hissed, his dark wings spreading menacingly. "I am the shadow that lives in the heart of every man. You cannot escape me. Not forever. We are no longer afraid of you," Isabella shouted, taking a step forward, her eyes burning with new determination. "I am no longer your prisoner." Azrath laughed, a shrill sound that seemed to echo from all directions. "You may have broken free from me, but you cannot escape what you have become. My illusion was only the beginning. You have darkness within you, Isabella, and it will grow." Adrian felt Isabella's hand tremble in his. "Don't listen to him, he only wants to sow your doubt." But Azrath moved closer, his shadow enveloping them both. "You know I'm right, Isabella. I don't create anything from nothing. I amplified what was already inside you. Your lust for power, your desire to control Adrian. All of this was real." "No. It's not true," Isabella murmured, her eyes beginning to fill with fear. Adrian clutched Seraphiel's amulet, trying to summon the light that had saved him before, but it remained silent, as if its power had been drained. "Do you understand now?" Azrith continued, coming so close that Adrian could feel the cold emanating from his dark body. "You cannot use light to save darkness. You cannot save what was never completely pure." Adrian felt despair growing in his soul. The amulet was unresponsive, Isabella was about to give in, and Azrith was growing stronger. Then he heard Seraphiel's voice, soft and clear, like a whisper deep in his heart. "Light does not defeat darkness through force, but through love and forgiveness." Adrian understood, let the amulet fall and turned to Isabella, tears in his eyes. "I love you, no matter who you are or who you have been. You are not just his creation. You are more than that. You chose to fight him, and that makes you real." Isabella looked into his eyes, and tears began to flow down her cheeks. "But, and the darkness within me? There is no light without shadow," Adrian said, wiping away her tears. "But you can choose how to live with it. You can choose not to let it control you." His words filled her with hope. Isabella felt the warmth of his love penetrate her heart, melting the ice of fear and doubt. And then, a light began to shine from her chest, growing in intensity until it enveloped the entire roof. Azrith screamed in pain, his shadow writhing under the purifying light. "No. That's not possible. You're mine. I'm no longer your prisoner," Isabella said, her voice firm and clear. "I am no longer your creature, I choose to be free." The light exploded, destroying the demon's shadow in a blinding flash. Azrith screamed, his body of darkness shattering into thousands of particles that scattered in the wind. When the light faded, Adrian and Isabella stood alone on the roof, holding hands. The sky was clear, and the sun shone warmly above them. "It's gone," Isabella whispered, looking at Adrian with gratitude. "We won." "Not just us," Adrian said, feeling a deep peace in his soul. "The light within us, our love, was stronger than the darkness." They embraced, letting the sun's rays comfort them, knowing that regardless of the shadows of the past, they now had the power to choose the light. After Azrith's defeat, Adrian and Isabella finally found some respite. The days passed at a quiet pace, a kind of post-temporal calm, in which nothing seemed to disturb the fragile balance they had managed to build. The light they had found within themselves seemed to be their protection, but they knew that any victory was only temporary. But even in this moment of apparent peace, Adrian could not escape a strange feeling that haunted him. Even with Azrith destroyed, even with Isabella freed, he could not forget that the battle of souls was far from over. It was a fight that was not only fought on the spiritual fields, but also within each human being's. So one morning when the frost covered the grass, Adrian woke up early and headed to the park. The cold wind whistled through his stray hair, and his thoughts were restless, refusing to give him the peace he was looking for. And the park, Isabella was already waiting for him. She was a changed woman. She was no longer a prisoner of an illusion, no longer a puppet of darkness. Now, she had that inner light that came from her own choice, from the choice to live with her whole being, with all her flaws and imperfections, but also with the desire to improve. "Adrian, are you okay?" she asked him, catching sight of him searching with his eyes for something he couldn't describe. "I'm not sure. Even now, it's hard for me to believe that I won." "It's not about a definitive win," she answered slowly, looking into his eyes. "That is our daily struggle. Our daily choice." Adrian sighed deeply, but he felt a certain peace in her words. "Why can't I feel completely at peace, Isabella? Even now, there is a kind of restlessness that consumes me. The darkness still haunts me. Because there is darkness in each of us, Adrian, we cannot deny that sometimes it is stronger. Azrith may have been defeated, but each of us has his own dark side to deal with." "That is right," he said thoughtfully. "So what do we do then? How can we be sure that we will not be lost in the darkness again?" Isabella looked up at the gray sky, where the clouds floated slowly, like silent specters. "We have no certainties, we never will. But that doesn't mean we can't make conscious choices, day by day. That we can't forget who we are and what we choose to become." Adrian looked at her with piercing eyes, seeing in her a wisdom he had never seen before. Maybe the real battle wasn't between light and darkness, but between the need for control and the power to accept. In that moment, He understood that he could never be completely free from the shadows, but he could choose how to live with them. "You showed me the way, Isabella," he said, truly smiling for the first time in a long time. "Maybe there is no end to this battle. Maybe there is no definitive victory. But our choice, to be aware, to forgive, and to face our darkness, that is what makes us alive." Isabella smiled too, a smile full of peace and acceptance. "That's all we can do, to live with what we have, to love and face our fears, choosing the light in every moment." And so, with that deep understanding between them, they left the past behind and stepped together into a new day. The light of dawn was making its way over the horizon, and the world seemed, for a moment, full of possibilities. But even in that silence, Adrian knew that, deep down, the battle was not completely over. But with every choice they made, with every step they took together, they were closer to true freedom, not that of a perfect world, but that of a life truly lived, in the face of their own humanity. It was true that darkness always had a place in each of them, but the light they found in their hearts, in their love, gave them the strength to face any shadow, no matter how big it was. And that was enough for that day. Weeks had passed since Azareth had been banished, and Adrian and Isabella were rebuilding their lives, each in their own way. Adrian had finally given up on dirty cases, and was dedicating his time to trials that brought justice to those who could not obtain it themselves. Isabella, on the other hand, was trying to discover her true identity, beyond the influence of the darkness that had shaped her. However, in the silent nights, Adrian felt that unsettling shiver running through his skin again. Something was wrong. He felt like a presence was following him. It was watching him. It was waiting for him. On such a night, a disturbing dream caught him in its webs. He was in a dark courtroom, where the benches were empty, and at the lectern was a judge with his face covered by a black veil. Adrian Vasilescu, his deep voice spoke, almost unnaturally echoing. "You thought it was all over?" Adrian felt his throat go dry. He tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come out. The judge raised his hand and a familiar figure appeared from the shadows. It was Isabella, but not as he knew her. Her eyes were devoid of their usual warmth, and a strange, dark aura hovered around her. "What did you do to her?" Adrian shouted. The judge chuckled coldly. "Oh, Adrian, we didn't do anything. She made the choice. Do you really think you've defeated the darkness? That a simple decision can erase the ties she had with me?" Adrian turned to Isabella, who seemed caught in a trance. A tear slid down her cheek, but she said nothing. "It's just a dream," he muttered, trying to regain control. The judge burst into a loud laugh. "Do you think you're safe in your world? Do you think your choice has changed anything? The darkness doesn't go away, Adrian, it just waits. And Isabella is living proof that our roots go deeper than you can imagine." With a sudden movement, Isabella raised her hand, and Adrian felt an invisible force pulling him back. He struggled, but he was powerless. Then, from the shadows, two cold hands gripped his shoulders. "We will meet again soon," whispered a voice he knew all too well. He opened his eyes suddenly, his heart pounding in his chest. He was in his bed, covered in cold sweat. The rain was beating against the window, and outside there was a heavy silence. That morning, he hurried to the office, where Isabella was working on a case. When he entered, she looked at him in surprise. "Are you okay?" she asked. Adrian studied her carefully. She looked like the same Isabella he knew. But in her eyes, for a split second, he thought he saw a strange glint. "Yes," he said, uncertain. "Just another hard night." But deep down, he knew it wasn't over. That the darkness didn't give up so easily. And that the real weighing of souls was just beginning. Adrian tried to push away his anxiety as he worked on the cases on his desk, but the image of the dream still haunted his mind. The mysterious judge's voice, the changed Isabella, the cold hands that had gripped him. It all seemed more than just a nightmare. He looked up at Isabella, who was sitting at her desk, her eyes fixed on a file. She seemed calm, absorbed in her work. But Adrian couldn't forget that strange spark he had seen in her eyes that morning. Had she really changed, or was the past still pulling her back? He took a deep breath and stood up. He had to find out the truth. "Isabella, could I talk to you for a moment?" She looked up and smiled at him, but Adrian noticed a slight hesitation in her gesture. "Sure. What happened?" Adrian sat on the edge of his desk, crossing his arms. "I had a dream last night, a nightmare. And you were there." Isabella blinked a few times, looking confused. A nightmare? About what? Adrian wrung his hands. You were changed, cold, distant, as if you had returned to the darkness. And there was someone else there. A judge with a veiled face. He told me that the darkness doesn't go away, that it just waits. Isabella's eyes darkened for a split second, but quickly regained their neutral expression. Adrian, it was just a dream, she said softly. Nothing more. But what if it wasn't? What if it's a warning? What if Azrath or something is trying to draw you back? Isabella folded her arms and looked down. Do you think I don't feel this? Do you know how hard it is to fight your past? Every day is a battle, Adrian. Sometimes I wonder if I'm truly free. Adrian came closer and took her hands in his. You are free as long as you choose the light. But you have to be honest with me, Isabella. Have you felt anything strange lately? Have you had any strange dreams or sensations? She hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. Yes, sometimes I feel like someone is watching me. Like shadows are following me. But I thought it was just my imagination. A shiver ran down Adrian's spine. It wasn't just his paranoia. Something or someone was watching him. We have to find out what's going on, he said firmly. Isabella squeezed his hands. Together. Adrian agreed, but one thought haunted him. What if the darkness that was lurking for Isabella was closer than they imagined? What if the battle had just begun? And what if, this time, they would not win? The nights had become increasingly difficult for Adrian. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt the presence of that judge in his dream, that entity that seemed to know his every mistake, every weakness. The darkness he had tried to bury had not disappeared. It was waiting for him, patiently, creeping through the cracks of his soul. On a rainy evening, when the office had emptied and only Isabella was left to finish a report, Adrian decided not to postpone the inevitable. We need to go to someone who can explain what is happening, he said. Isabella looked up from her file. Who? Father Gavrils. Isabella's face darkened. A priest. He's no ordinary priest, Isabella. This man has dealt with things like this before. Maybe he can tell us who that judge in my dream is and why you feel like someone is following you. Isabella looked skeptical, but finally nodded. Okay, let's go. Father Gavrils' church was on the edge of town, an old stone building with stained glass windows that cast colored shadows in the dim candlelight. Inside, the air smelled of incense, and the silence was oppressive. Father Gavril was waiting for them, as if he already knew they would come. He was a man in his 60s, with white hair and piercing eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. I was waiting for you, he said simply. Adrian and Isabella looked at each other in surprise. How did you know? Adrian asked. The priest sighed and motioned for them to sit on the benches. Because the shadows are moving again. And you are caught between them. Adrian felt his heart beat faster. What is happening, Father? Who is that judge I dreamed of? The father ran his hand over his beard, thinking. The judge. He is a messenger of the balance, an old spirit, which appears when a soul is still undecided between light and darkness. Isabella frowned. But Adrian has already chosen. That's right, but you forgot one thing. The choice is never final. People fall, rise, doubt, give in to temptation. And the judge watches over those who are still easy prey for the shadows. Adrian felt a knot in his stomach. And Isabella? Why does she feel like she's being followed? The priest turned his gaze to the young woman. Because her past has not yet been left behind. Because darkness never forgets its servants. Isabella's eyes flashed with anger. I am no longer the servant of darkness. The father nodded. But he still wants you. And he will try to take you back. The oppressive silence in the church became suffocating. Isabella bit her lower lip, and Adrian clenched his fists. What can we do? He asked, looking the priest straight in the eye. You must face him, with the judge, with the shadows that follow you. And you must choose again. Adrian felt a cold shiver run down his spine. And if we choose wrong? The father lowered his gaze and said in a low voice. Then the darkness will take you all. That night, Adrian and Isabella were no longer the same. They knew that the danger was real, and that, one way or another, they would soon have to fight for their souls. The night had fallen like a heavy cloak over the city. Adrian and Isabella were returning in silence from Father Gavrill's church. With every step, with every heartbeat, they felt the weight of what they had learned press down on them more and more. Adrian had no more doubts. The shadows were following them, and the weighing of souls was not over yet. "How do you think we should face him?" Isabella finally asked, in a low voice. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, trying to organize his thoughts. "I don't know. But if the judge is an old spirit who watches over those who are in the balance, it means we still have something unresolved." Isabella sighed and hugged her body as if the cold of the night had entered her bones. "The darkness never gives up, Adrian. That's what Azrath told me when he first whispered my name. He doesn't take you by force, he just convinces you that it's easier to give up the fight." Adrian looked at her carefully. "Then let's not give up." Chapter 3. In the face of love and his own regrets. That night, Adrian couldn't sleep. He turned from side to side, trying to ignore the feeling that something unseen was watching him from the dark corners of the room. Then, at 3 in the morning, the room suddenly became cold. His breathing stopped. He felt a terrible weight pressing on his chest. His eyes suddenly opened. The judge was there. He was standing on the edge of the bed, tall, imposing, with his dark cloak, and his face was still covered by that black veil. "Adrian Vasilescu," said that voice that seemed to vibrate through the air, echoing in his mind. "Did you think you could escape the scales?" Adrian tried to get up, but he felt something pinning him to the bed. "What do you want from me?" The judge slowly bowed his head. "The answer. The final choice." A dark fog rose around the room, and when it cleared, Adrian was no longer in his bedroom. He was in a huge courtroom, identical to the one in his dream. But this time, Isabella was by his side. She opened her mouth to say something, but the judge raised his hand and a complete silence fell over the place. "You have both fought the darkness," the judge said. "But neither of you is free. You still carry the remnants of the past within you. You still have doubts." Adrian clenched his fists. "I have already chosen. I have chosen to live right, to fix the mistakes of the past." The judge raised his chin slightly. "What if you could have everything you have ever wanted? Power, wealth. Never fear again." An unreal scene appeared before Adrian. Him in his office, stronger than ever, with people bowing their heads before him. He had everything. And most importantly, there was no more fear. All you have to do is give up remorse. Conscience. Adrian closed his eyes. He didn't want to see it at the same time. Isabella was also faced with a vision of her own, a life without fear, without guilt, without painful memories, a life in which no one could judge her for her past. "You don't have to run anymore," the judge whispered to her. "All you have to do is accept who you always were." The oppressive silence was broken by a single word. "No." Adrian opened his eyes. Isabella stood straight, her fists clenched. "No," she repeated, "I don't want to be who I was anymore. Even if I'll be followed for the rest of my life. Even if the shadows will never leave me alone, I prefer to fight." Adrian felt a strange warmth in his chest. Isabella's courage gave him the strength to breathe again. He looked at the judge. "I choose the same. I don't need power. I don't need control. I choose to live, even if it means carrying the burden of the past." The courtroom began to shake. The visions around him fell apart. The judge remained motionless for a few seconds. Then he nodded slightly. "Your choice is made." The room sank into darkness. Adrian started and suddenly got up from the bed. He was back in his bedroom. The morning light was filtering through the curtains. Next to him, Isabella woke up too, looking around, frightened. "Did you see it too?" she asked, her voice trembling. Adrian nodded. "I think so." They looked at each other in silence. They knew that, in one way or another, they had won. But they also knew that the darkness never really went away. They had defeated it today. But what would happen tomorrow? Adrian rubbed his face with his hands, trying to chase away the strange sensation that still tingled through his skin. Isabella, sitting on the edge of the bed, stared at the wall, her eyes wide open. She could still hear the echo of the judge's voice, that entity that had tested her soul, that had tried to lure her back into the darkness. "Do you think it's over?" she asked, her voice low. Adrian sighed and rested his elbows on his knees. "I don't know." A heavy silence fell over the room. Beyond the window, the city was starting to wake up, cars honking in the distance. Life was moving on. But something had changed in them. Isabella stood up and ran a hand through her hair. I have to go. Adrian looked at her in surprise. Where? She bit her lower lip.